Um, Thank you for joining. We have a short and hopefully informative session on our financial picture at First Press. Um, One of the things that's come out of surveys and other comments is that people want to better understand how things are working at the church. And so I've tried to put things together, calling it a Finance 101 in case this is a topic you don't typically focus on, but I've put it in terms of a household. So let's just dig right in and start with our blessings. So as we all know, First Press is quite blessed to have a great congregation, very vibrant folks, eager to do social justice in the world. We've got a wonderful staff, currently on the interim basis with Jane and also with Kelly Wyant and the Zoom crew, keeping things going both here in the congregation as well as online. And you just heard from Andy, our music director, and we've got folks you don't see that often with Cherise King in the office, as well as Javier, keeping things updated and the grounds and buildings in good shape. So the buildings themselves are a big asset for us. And the pastor's manse is also important to us, and will help us as we call a new pastor in 2023. So in addition to just ourselves, we have many gifts. The gifts are what we would call income or revenue. You can switch to the next slide. Do I have a clicker? Okay, so we've got many gifts. Look at it as right now, this year, $785,000 of income. And you can see by the big purple section, that is what we have as pledged gifts from our congregation. You'll see that's also just about half, right? Most churches, that's all they have. They just have the income pledged by the congregation, but we are blessed with other areas. We have the dark blue section, which is rent from our properties. The money that we generate from CARA and from TLC and from other sources. All of those three areas, CARA is the dark blue, TLC is the medium blue, and other groups make up the light blue. So we have a little more than half of giving from the congregation and a whole lot of rent that makes up our income. And you can look at August. August, we are right on budget. The top two lines, one is where we are relative to budget, and the other is August as a percentage of the year. So we are like right on schedule, and the bottom row is our full budget for the year. Okay, so we're 8/12 through the year, and we are 8/12 through the budget. We also have many expenses. So the expenses is $880,000 for this year, and you can see that that's about $100,000 delta over our income. And if you look, the big majority of that, as with any congregation, is the staff. The full-time staff is the dark purple, and then we've got about another 4% that is our temporary staff, and together those make up about 65% of our spending. So that's good. In times past, we've said that we want to make sure that we've got our staff paid well, market wages, but the one thing for us to be aware of is while most people only are able to pay for 100% of their budget out of congregational giving, our staff expense alone is 125% of our congregational giving. So what we give as a congregation to the church doesn't even cover our staff. And in addition to the staff, we've got to pay for our facilities, for heat, for keeping things well maintained, and then we've got special projects, and some of us will be on to stay for a conversation about that. With solar panels or more work to electrify the campus, just to keep things in good order. We like to have a good chunk of maintenance just to keep the facilities doing well. And then obviously we're very focused on social justice, and giving, and that's 5% of our total budget, but it's 10% of what the congregation gives. So we'll focus on that just in a moment, but wanted folks to see kind of generally how we spend our money, and it's 65% on staff, another big chunk on facilities, and then the rest is on giving and our programs. So if we switch to the next page, we as a congregation tithe. We give 10% of what the congregation gives to the church. We give back to be spent by the social justice committee. And so social justice typically is doing projects, but is also writing checks to organizations that we feel deserve support because of the work they do out in the world and the community. So in 2022, our pledges were $450,000, and our social giving was 10% of that, or $45,000. And for some people who've been around a while, we are not counting the per capita, which is paid to the presbytery, as part of our giving. That's just part of our other expenses. So I tried to allude to this, but our spending is greater than our income. If this were the situation at your house, it would be a huge problem. We have about 12% more expenses than we have income. And so the shortfall this year has been about $95,000. So just sit there for a moment. $95,000 of shortfall. Some people would die to make, oh, I don't need that word, would love to have $95,000 as their pay. But that's how much we overspend relative to what we earn between our giving and our rent. We still have a $95,000 shortfall based on how much we're spending. So you're like, well, how does that work? Oh my goodness, you know, are we taking on a lot of debt? Well, folks who are new to the community may not be aware, and others who've been around for a while are aware that we have a legacy fund. And so the amount of that $95,000 shortfall is represented by that green wedge of the circle. Maybe I should have made it red, which is normally the color associated with a loss, but I chose green because we are fortunate to have it and we are blessed to have the legacy fund. So in this year, about 92,000 or about 100 grand is being provided by a potential draw from our legacy fund. There's a busy slide here, but basically the legacy fund is accumulated gifts from people who have made gifts to the church over time. It started in 2013 with a single large gift from Ruth English, and through the help of many here at the church, including Don Fiddler, Dave Thornton, and Joan Roy, we have a legacy fund that now has about 35 members, people who have pledged to donate to the church as part of their wills. And so gifts have, on a bittersweet basis, grown as people have passed on. But we also do get specific gifts to the legacy fund for people who would like to contribute to the church's ability to do special projects. So when we draw from the fund, we try to do things in a way that is in keeping with an endowment, so that we're not just running down the number down to zero. So we have a policy of spending between 5% and 8% of the fund, and not just the fund, you know, based on when it's really high or really low, but to moderate over the last 3 years. We take an average of the last 12 quarters. So, for example, at the beginning of this year, it was $1.8 million, and like everything else that has dropped in the market, as of August, it's down to $1.5 million, and our average over the last 12 quarters is $1.2 million, 1.3. So when we take a draw, we're calculating it on that last 12 quarter number. So if you look to the next page, you'll see the two green are the 5% number and the 8% number, and you'll also see that the $92,000 potential draw is right in that range. So this year we are right on target and being able to have the benefit of the legacy fund and our discipline of using the legacy fund to make up any shortfall has been a huge blessing to the congregation. So thanks for all of the gifts, and thanks also for folks who named the church in their documents for adding to the legacy of First Pres. So one question that's come up is, what's our burn rate? Burn rate is a common number here in Silicon Valley, as companies generally are spending more than they have income. And the answer is, if we stay disciplined and we only spend between that 5 and 8%, which is a number that investment managers use as their recommended rate for an endowment fund or a legacy fund to continue to be available. If we stay disciplined and within that 5 to 8%, we won't have a burn rate that will draw down on our fund. And we continue to get gifts, both from people who are active in the congregation and people who have been active in the congregation. And so the combination of market appreciation and gifts to the church, and then a disciplined amount of draw, we should not actually have a measurable burn rate to the legacy fund. So we're hoping that over time, we are counting on over time having a legacy fund that will continue to supplement the fact that we basically are overspending what we give as a congregation. It's a decision that we as members and as session have agreed to as our practice, because we want a very strong and educated and vibrant staff, and we have a staff that exceeds what most congregations our size would normally be able to support just the congregational giving. So that's it. We have income, we have expenses, and we have a legacy fund that enables us to have expenses beyond our income. So that's it. I'm very happy to open up for questions. Hopefully this has been the right level of clarification for people who have requested it. And if there are, can people who are on Zoom send in questions or raise their hand? So if you are on Zoom and have a question, please either raise your hand or maybe type it into the chat. Would that work?
Yeah, I can look and see if
either of those options for folks who are on Zoom, you can raise your hand or you can type a question into chat and we'll get it. Otherwise, if there are people here in the room who have a question, just raise your hand and either come up. I don't think the mic is active, but if you just want to raise your hand and ask a question, I can repeat it for everyone to hear and answer it as well. Crickets. What do crickets sound like? Are you seeing? Oh, a question.
So great presentation, thank you. Will a recording of this, your presentation, be available somewhere for the church, for those who want to see it later?
Yes.
That's part of my question.
Yes, that's part of the service recording.
Yes, it is part of the service recording, and so it will be available, hopefully bookmarked in case people just want to jump to the end.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Can you repeat it?
No, it's a hand raise.
So there's a question from Zoom. We are trying to figure out how to get it so that the Zoom person can ask.
Edie, do you have a question? It's more of a comment, but it's sort of a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
In the sanctuary? Hi, Lee. Great presentation. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
I am, as I listen, especially to the discussion of the legacy fund, I'm thinking there is a sort of growing conversation in philanthropy about the small spend down rate that is the norm in philanthropy, that it's like, 5%. And as you said, there's, a virtue in continuing the legacy fund. And but there is also a movement in social change organizations to spend more in recognition of just all the challenges we face and the impact that could be had. So I am just thinking about that as I hear the about the strength of our legacy fund and our finances generally. As you say, if we had a shortfall in a household budget, we would be worried, but I'm not worried given that the church is not a household. And I'm just wondering if there's been any discussion on session about that. I know in this interim period now is not necessarily the time, but wondering if folks are kind of looking at that conversation and thinking at all about increasing our giving.
Give you some examples.
Mm.
So yeah, great question. So last year we ended up in a situation where we had a draw that was much smaller than the 5 to 8%, and the social justice team said, in recognition of the great need in society or in the world, that we should make some specific gifts. So there were 4 organizations that were recommended that were given special one-off, larger than normal gifts, and so we actually contributed, I think it was about $20,000, 4 times $5,000, which was about half, again, of what the Social Justice Committee would normally have been had available to spend. So that was one way where we've done some extra spending. In the years when Rob was here, the conversation was, let's use a chunk of the money to fund the program where we had interns and part-time youth staff, and so that was a bigger source of revenue or spending for the church that did draw down chunks of the legacy fund. So there are those conversations from time to time, and as we have resources and needs in the community, obviously we can talk about that. I think it's more on an ad hoc basis. Yes, Evan.
You may have covered this, but did you say that the legacy draw last year was almost 0 and this year it's larger than usual? Can you comment on the historic pattern of that draw?
Yes, so during the pandemic, the church did benefit from the government program called PPP loans, which were basically implemented for folks to be able to maintain their staff and not have to make cuts to budget. So because we got a PPP loan of $100,000, which was about the amount that we expected to draw, we didn't have to make a draw, and that's what gave us the ability to make these extra gifts for these social justice organizations.
I see Pat Kinney has a hand up.
Yes, John.
Pat, go ahead.
Well, this comment could be
Oh, sorry.
spending in general, but I'm only focusing on the gifting to other organizations right now. Does our session follow the procedure, not only having goals and purposes, but having written objectives for what we're trying to accomplish by those gifts? By objectives, I mean something that's written down, and a third neutral party could say whether the purpose of the gift was or was not achieved. Or do we follow the more conventional and popular idea of someone recommended it, we thought it was a good idea, it seems like it's working, and no one's complaining, which is the normal way I give gifts. But I would just think that we should consider having objective criteria for what we're actually trying to accomplish, besides transferring money.
I think that I will say that it's more the latter than having a lot of specific objectives, and I think part of it is it's up to the Social Justice Committee to determine what they view as an appropriate organization to receive the gifts. And so whatever session does not require the Social Justice Committee to have parameters, any kind of audit of where the money has gone. But there have been changes in the organizations that have received social justice funds over time. And so that proves in my mind that the Social Justice Committee is very active and thoughtful about how they are spending their budget. I also saw that Pat Kinney was online and might have had a question. Pat?
Yeah, I can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you brought up, the last two items. And we're just social justice. I'm still on the budget committee of social justice. And as Lee mentioned earlier too, we tend to sort of plan out our year and then spend about half of our money in the first half. And then we're just in the process of seeing whether we want to continue our original plan, which pretty much we do, and the money will go out in the last couple months of the year. And as part of that, I was wondering if we are in a position again this year to ask for another special draw. I think another reason we did it last year was that there were a lot of gifts into the fund last year. So we thought it would be good to not just save all those gifts, but actually use some of them.
Yes, and we did get gifts that were from folks who would have wanted the money to be spent for specific social justice or environmental purposes, and so that was part of the background for last year's gifts. Will there be funds available right now? We are on budget, which means that we don't have a surplus of gifts this year. There have not been any gifts to the legacy fund. We could still consider it, given the gifts that were received last year. In light of the fact that, keeping in mind that the fund has dropped about 15% from where it's in January.
Yeah.
But we can have that conversation at session. I didn't go into all of the areas where we might be over budget or under budget, but we did have overlap of pastoral staff for the month of May, so that and we're benefiting from Kelly Wyant for the full year when it was budgeted for the half year. So there's some areas where we are overspent, and if facilities and social justice all come in right on budget, we will need to do the draw. But there's a meeting right after this meeting to talk about some of those elements. So, but we'll at session, we've got several more months of the year to figure this out and to decide how much of a draw to make, and if there are purposes beyond just covering a deficit that we want to make the draw for.
Okay, thank you.
Pat? I'm sorry, Janet.
Can people on Zoom hear the people in the...
I will repeat your question.
Pardon me?
I'll repeat your question.
Okay. So, I think this is really valuable, and I'm sorry that more people aren't here to hear it. So I hope that we make an effort to share the presentation and the conversation with the community somehow or other. But following up a little bit on what Edie said, I would like to have a congregational conversation at some point
So Janet Cox has commented that this topic should be made available to a broader audience than is currently either on Zoom or in the congregation, and we will try to maybe parse it out of the recording and make it available to folks, and spread the word for people who did not chime in or listen in today. And the second topic is Janet's would like to have a broader conversation across the congregation about how to use the legacy fund and whether an endowment perspective of spending sort of that 5 to 8% is the right way to think about it. We can certainly have a broader conversation. I think first bringing it to session would be an appropriate place to start that conversation, and then have more congregational input after that. But I was trying to point out that we have over time spent significantly bigger numbers than on an endowment basis when specific topics have been brought and suggested as ways to spend the money beyond just filling the gap in the budget. So let's we can bring that to session and have that be an ongoing topic or a specific conversation in the future. I saw a note that Cindy Chin Lee may have sent in a comment. Are you able to read that? Wasn't in the chat.
I put down the charities that we gave to last year with the draw just for information. And I also welcome any members to contact me if they have questions about social justice. We welcome new members of our team as well.
Do you happen to know the 4 organizations? Because I don't.
Yeah, the 4 organizations were Adolescent Counseling Services, No More Deaths. Let's see, I actually put it in the chat. Day Worker Center and Safe Landings. That's all an immigration service. So Adolescent Counseling Services, Day Worker Center, Mountain View, Safe Landings, and No More Deaths were our charities last year for the draw.
Excellent. Thanks, Cindy.
Yeah.
And also, as Cindy is saying, anyone who wants to join the Social Justice Committee to make other suggestions, certainly welcome. Reach out to Cindy Chin Lee and join the conversation. Anyone else? Is there anyone online who has not had a chance to chime in? Evan, you have another question?
When is the social justice meeting?
Cindy, can you hear the
Yeah,
question?
social justice has kind of an odd schedule. We meet monthly, and once.
How do we get Cindy's voice on?
Oh, I think that my voice is on, but anyway, we meet monthly. The meetings alternate between Saturdays at 11:30 and then Wednesdays at noon. And that is to accommodate different members of the team who have different availability. Did you hear that?
So the next one is next Saturday on October
8th, yes.
And it's on the church calendar.
So check the church calendar. It's in back of the bulletin. So, okay. So I think that covers everything. And anyone else is here who wants to talk about the biggest non-staff topic, which is facilities. And part of what we're spending the conversation on, or spending the time on in conversation, is upgrading our sound system and our technical capabilities to improve our hybrid worship service and our Zoom online collaboration with what goes on in the sanctuary. So let's sign off for now and move to the conversation that's here in the sanctuary. Thank you everyone for joining, and as stewardship is underway, wanted to give you that background so that you understand how important your giving is to the congregation. Thank you.